Part 1. His name was Santiago. He arrived at sunset, driving his flock of sheep to an old abandoned church. Its roof had collapsed long ago, and a huge sycamore tree had grown where the sacristy once stood. He decided to spend the night there. He guided all his sheep through the broken door and set up some wooden planks to prevent them from escaping during the night. There were no wolves in the area, but one of the sheep had run away once, and he had to spend the entire next day searching for it. He spread his shawl on the ground and lay down on it, using the book he had just finished reading as a pillow. Before falling asleep, he thought that from now on he should read longer books. That way it would take more time to finish them, and they would make more comfortable pillows at night. It was still dark when he woke up. He looked up and saw twinkling stars through the partially destroyed roof. He thought to himself, I wish I could have slept a little longer. He had dreamed the same dream as the one he had seen the week before, and once again he woke up before it ended. He got up, took a sip of wine, then waved his staff to awaken his sleeping sheep. He had noticed that most of the sheep would wake up as soon as he did, as if a mysterious force linked their lives to his, as they had been traveling together for 2 years in search of water and pasture. He whispered to himself, They've grown so used to me that they've learned my schedule. Then, after a moment of reflection, he thought that perhaps it was the other way around, and that he had learned their schedule instead. Still, there were some sheep that were slow to rise, so he woke them one by one with his staff, calling each by name. He never doubted that the sheep could understand what he said. That's why he would sometimes read them passages from books that had caught his attention, or talk to them about the loneliness of a shepherd's life in the countryside, or about its joys, or comment on strange things he had seen in the towns he often passed through. But for the past 2 days, he had only one topic on his mind: the girl from the city he would reach in 4 days at most. She was the daughter of a merchant, and he had only visited that city once, the year before. The merchant owned a fabric shop and liked to see the shearing of the sheep himself, to avoid being cheated. One of Santiago's friends had told him about the shop, so the shepherd had led his flock there. He said to the merchant, I want to sell some wool. The shop was busy, and the merchant asked the shepherd to wait until evening. So the shepherd went outside and sat on the pavement in front of the shop, then pulled a book from the bag he was carrying. A female voice next to him said, I didn't know shepherds could read books. She was a girl with distinct Andalusian features, long hair and eyes that vaguely reminded him of the ancient Moorish conquerors. The young shepherd replied, But sheep know more things than books ever will. They kept talking for more than 2 hours. She told him she was the merchant's daughter and talked about village life, where every day resembled the one before. The shepherd told her about the Andalusian countryside and the latest curiosities he had seen in the cities he had passed through. He was happy he no longer had to talk only to his sheep. The girl asked him, How did you learn to read? He answered, Like everyone else, at school. She said, But if you know how to read, why are you only a shepherd? The young man avoided answering that question, confident that she wouldn't understand. He went on telling her stories of his travels, and her small Moorish eyes widened in wonder or narrowed with amazement. As time passed, the young man began to secretly hope the day would never end, that her father would stay busy for a long time and maybe even ask him to wait for 3 more days. That was when he realized he was feeling something he had never felt before: the desire to remain in one place forever. The days would never be the same with the girl with the black hair. But the merchant eventually returned, asked him to shear the wool of 4 sheep, paid him what was due, and invited him to return the next year. Only 4 days remained before he would return to that same place. His excitement was great, but doubt crept in as well. Perhaps the girl had forgotten him. Many shepherds passed by to sell their wool. He said to his sheep, It doesn't matter. I know other girls in other towns too. But deep down, he knew he could never pretend not to care, and that shepherds, like sailors or traveling merchants, always knew of a town where a girl lived who could make them forget the hardship of roaming the world so freely. When the first signs of dawn appeared, the shepherd began leading his sheep toward the sunrise, thinking, She doesn't need to decide anything. Maybe that's why she stays with me. The only needs the sheep had were for water and food, and since their shepherd knew the best pastures in Andalusia, they would always be loyal to him, even if their days were all the same, even if the hours dragged slowly from sunrise to sunset, even if they never read a single book or understood the language of the people who spoke in the villages. They were content with water and food, and that was enough. In return, they offered their wool, their companionship, and occasionally their meat. He said to himself, if I were to suddenly turn into a fierce beast and began killing them one by one, they wouldn't notice until most of the flock was gone. That's because they trust me. They've stopped relying on their instincts, just because I lead them to pasture. The young man began to be surprised by the thoughts crossing his mind, realizing they were strange. Maybe the church with the sycamore tree growing inside it was haunted by ghosts. Could that be why he had the same dream again? And why he now felt a strange anger toward his sheep, who had long been his companions? He drank a bit of the wine left from last night's dinner and wrapped his cloak around his body. He knew that in a few hours, when the sun grew stronger, the heat would make it impossible to guide his flock across the open plains. In summer, all of Spain slept through the midday heat, which lasted until evening. During that time, he had to carry his cloak with him, and yet when these men see our fields and our women, they say they wish they could stay here forever. Never. I want to see their women in the lands they come from, because they never stay among us. But those men have pockets full of money, while here only shepherds can afford to roam the land. Then I'll become a shepherd. The father added nothing to what he had said. The next day, he gave his son a chest containing 3 old Spanish gold coins. He said to his son, "These are coins I once found in a field, and I always thought they should have gone to the church the day you were ordained a priest. Use them to buy a flock and roam the land, until the day you learn that our home is the finest of all palaces, and that our women are the most beautiful." Then he blessed his son, and the boy saw in his father's eyes that same longing to roam the land, a desire that had always been alive, despite the decades he had spent suppressing it by staying in one place where he slept, drank, and ate every night. The horizon turned red, then the sun rose. The young man remembered his conversation with his father and felt joy, for he had now seen many palaces and many women, although none of them compared to the one he was hoping to see in 2 days. Now he had a cloak, a book he could exchange for another, and a flock of sheep. But more important than all of that, he was living his great dream every day, to travel. He thought that when he grew tired of the Andalusian countryside, he could sell his sheep and become a sailor. And when he grew weary of the sea, he would already have known many cities, many women, and many moments of happiness. And as he watched the sun rise, he wondered, how could anyone go to a seminary to search for God? He always tried to look for a new destination whenever he had the chance, and although he had passed by this spot many times, he had never entered that church. The world was vast, its limits endless. If he let his sheep guide him, he might discover more strange things in a short time. The problem was that the sheep wouldn't realize they were walking new paths every day. They never noticed that the pastures had changed, that the seasons were shifting, because all they cared about was food and water. Then the shepherd thought, maybe that's the way it is for all creatures, even for me. Ever since I met the merchant's daughter, no other woman has occupied my thoughts. He looked up at the sky and estimated that, based on his calculations, he would reach Tarifa before lunchtime. There, he could exchange his book for another, a larger one, refill his wine bottle, shave, and get a haircut. He had to look his best to meet the girl. And he didn't even want to imagine, not even for a moment, the idea that another shepherd, one with more sheep, might have arrived before him to ask for her hand. As he lifted his eyes to the sky and quickened his pace, he thought, the joy of life is nothing more than the possibility of making a dream come true. At that moment, he remembered that there was an old woman in Tarifa who knew how to interpret dreams, and that he had once again seen the same dream he had seen before. The old woman led the young man to a private room inside her house, separated from the living room by a curtain of multicolored plastic. Inside the room were a small table, a picture of the Sacred Heart, and 2 chairs. The old woman sat down and asked him to sit in front of her. She then took his hands in hers and began to recite a quiet prayer. Her prayer resembled the dawn prayers he had often witnessed during his wanderings. These people, too, were wanderers, though they weren't shepherds. The common rumor was that gypsies spent their lives deceiving people. It was also said that they had a pact with the devil and that they kidnapped children to make them slaves in their mysterious camps. When the young shepherd was a child, he used to live in constant fear of being kidnapped by gypsies. That old fear returned now as the woman held his hands. He tried to calm himself by thinking, but there's a picture of the Sacred Heart here. He didn't want his hands to tremble and reveal his fear, so he silently began to recite, "Our Father who art in heaven." The old woman said, without taking her eyes off his hands, "Strange." Then she fell silent again. His nerves grew more and more tense, and his hands began to tremble in spite of himself. The woman noticed and quickly made the sign of the cross over his hands. He said, "I didn't come here for palm reading, and I don't believe in that." He hesitated for a moment, then thought it would be better to just pay her and leave without learning anything. He had probably given too much importance to a dream just because it had repeated itself. At that moment, the old woman said, "You came to ask me about dreams, and dreams are the language of God. When he speaks in the language of the world, I can interpret it. But if he speaks in the language of your soul, only you can understand it. In any case, you'll still need to pay me." The young man thought to himself, "Here's another trick." But he decided to take the risk. After all, a shepherd is always at risk of wolves or drought, and that's what makes shepherding an adventurous trade. He said, "I dreamed the same dream twice in a row. I was with my flock in a pasture when suddenly a child appeared and started playing with the sheep. I don't really like people playing with my sheep. They get scared of strangers. But for some reason, they never fear children. I don't know why. I don't know how animals can sense the age of a human being." The old woman replied, "Go back to the dream. I've got a pot on the fire, and you don't have much money, so I won't waste all my time on you." The young man continued, a bit embarrassed. "The child played with the sheep for a while, then suddenly took my hand and led me to the Egyptian pyramids." He paused to see if the old woman recognized the name Egyptian pyramids, but she remained silent. Then he said, speaking the last 2 words very clearly so she'd understand, "And there, in front of the Egyptian pyramids, the child said to me, 'If you come here, you will find a hidden treasure.' And just as he was about to show me the exact spot, I woke up, both times." The old woman didn't say a word for a few moments. Then she took the young man's hands again and examined them carefully before saying, "I won't make you pay anything now, but I want 1/10 of the treasure if you find it." The boy laughed contentedly, so he would keep what little money he had and continue dreaming about hidden treasures. She must be a real gypsy, he thought. Gypsies are fools. He asked her, "So how do you interpret this dream?" "First, you must swear. Swear that you'll give me 1/10 of your treasure in exchange for what I'm about to tell you." The boy swore, and the old woman made him repeat the oath while looking straight at the image of the Sacred Heart. Then she said, "This is a dream in the language of the world, and I can interpret it. But the interpretation is very difficult, which is why I think I deserve a share of whatever you find. Here's the interpretation. You must go to the Egyptian pyramids. I've never heard of them before, but if a child points to them, then they must exist, and there you will find a treasure that will make you rich." At first, the boy was amazed. Then came annoyance. There had been no need to visit this woman just to hear such a simple thing. But then he remembered that he hadn't paid anything. He said, "If that's it, I didn't need to waste my time." The old woman replied, "You see, I told you from the beginning that your dream was difficult to interpret. The simplest things are the most extraordinary, and only the wise can see them. And since I am not wise, I must learn other arts. I used to read palms, for instance." He asked, "What should I do to get to Egypt?" "I only interpret dreams. I don't know how to make them come true. That's why I live on what my daughters give me. And what if I never get to Egypt?" "Then I won't get paid." But it wouldn't be the first time. The old woman added nothing more. She told the boy to leave, as he had taken up too much of her time. The shepherd left, feeling disappointed, and resolved never to believe in dreams again. He remembered he still had many things to do. He went off to look for something to eat. He traded his book for another, larger one, and sat on a wooden bench in the square to enjoy the new wine he had bought. It was a Hein he had bought. And by some inexplicable miracle, like many miracles in life, the wine managed to cool him off a little. His flock was in a stable at the city's entrance, in the care of a friend he had recently made. He had met many people in these parts, and that's why he loved to travel. A person can always make new friends without having to stay with them forever. When you see the same faces every day, like in the seminary, they eventually become a part of your life. And once they do, they want to change your life. And if you're not what they want you to be, they get upset. Because everyone seems to know exactly how we should live our lives, but no one ever knows how to live their own life. They're like the woman who interprets dreams but doesn't know how to make them come true. He decided to wait until the sun began to set before heading back to the countryside with his flock. In 3 days, he would see the merchant's daughter again. He opened the book he had gotten from the priest in Tarifa. It was a thick volume, and from the very first page he read a scene about a burial. Then he noticed that the names of the characters were too complicated, and he decided that if he ever wrote a book himself, he would introduce the characters one by one, so readers wouldn't have to memorize all their names at once. As he began to concentrate on his reading, which was actually quite entertaining, the burial scene took place during a snowfall, which made him feel refreshed despite the scorching sun. An old man sat next to him and started talking. The old man pointed toward the people in the square and asked, "What are those people doing?" "They're working," the shepherd replied curtly, pretending to be engrossed in his book. In truth, he was daydreaming about shearing his sheep 3 days from now in front of the merchant's daughter. She would see that he could do impressive things. He had imagined this scene dozens of times, always picturing her amazed as he explained how wool must be sheared from the back to the front. He also tried to recall some good stories to tell her while he worked. Most of them were stories he had read in books, but he would tell them as if he had lived them himself. She wouldn't know the difference. After all, she couldn't read. But the old man was persistent. He said he was hungry and thirsty and asked for a sip of wine. The shepherd offered him what he wanted, hoping the man would then leave him alone. Yet the old man kept chatting. He asked about the book in the boy's hands, and the shepherd thought about getting up and walking away. But then he remembered that he had been taught to respect the elderly. So he handed the book to the old man for 2 reasons. First, he couldn't even pronounce the title himself. And second, if the old man couldn't read, the boy would feel embarrassed and would have to move anyway. The old man turned the book over in his hands, examining it as if it were a miracle, and said, "This is an important book, but very boring." The boy was genuinely surprised. So this old man could read too, and he had already read this very book. If it really was as dull as he said, then there was still time to exchange it for another. The old man continued, "It's a book that talks about the same things all other books talk about, the inability of people to choose their own destinies. And in the end, it tries to convince you of the world's greatest lie." The boy asked in astonishment, "And what is the world's greatest lie?" "Here it is, that at a certain point in our lives, we lose control of what's happening to us, and our lives become controlled by fate. That's the world's greatest lie." "That didn't happen to me," the boy said. "I wanted to become a shepherd, and I became one." "That's better," the old man replied, "because you enjoy traveling." Santiago felt that the old man was reading his thoughts. Meanwhile, the old man kept flipping through the thick book without showing any sign of had any intention of giving it back. And the shepherd noticed that the old man was wearing strange clothes. He looked like an Arab, which wasn't all that unusual in the area since Tarifa was only a few hours from Africa. One only had to cross the strait by boat, and quite often Arabs would appear in town to buy goods. He had seen them praying in a very particular way several times a day. The boy asked, "Where are you from?" "From many places." "A person can't be from many places. I'm a shepherd, so I can be in many places, but I was born in just one, near a very old castle. That's where I come from." "Then let's say I was born in Salem." The shepherd didn't know where Salem was, but he didn't want to ask so as not to appear ignorant. He just kept watching the square. People came and went, looking very busy. Finally, he asked, hoping for some kind of clue, "So how are things in Salem?" "Just the same as always." That wasn't much of a clue, but at least he now knew Salem wasn't in Andalusia. Otherwise, he would have heard of the place. "And what do you do in Salem?" For the first time, the old man let out a hearty laugh and said, "What do I do in Salem? I'm the king of Salem." What a question. People say silly things sometimes. Sometimes it's better to live with silent sheep just looking for food and water, or with books that tell incredible tales when you want them to. But when you talk to people, they say things that make it hard to keep the conversation going. The old man added, "My name is Melchizedek. How many sheep do you have?" "Enough." "This old man wants to know more about my life than he should." "Then we have a problem," the old man said. "I can't help you if you think you already have enough sheep." The boy started to feel annoyed. He hadn't asked anyone for help. It was the old man who had asked for wine, who had started the conversation, and who had shown interest in his book. He said, "Give me back my book. I need to get my sheep and move on. Give me 1/10 of your flock, and I'll tell you how to find the hidden treasure." Then the boy suddenly remembered his dream, and everything clicked. The old woman hadn't charged him anything, but now this old man, perhaps her husband, was trying to charge him much more for some phony information. He must be a gypsy too. Before the boy could utter a word, the old man bent down, picked up a dry branch, and began writing on the sand that covered the main square of the small town. As he bent down, something on his chest gleamed with such a bright flash that the shepherd nearly fainted from the sight. However, the old man quickly moved to tighten his coat around his body. The boy's astonishment faded, and he was able to clearly see what the old man was writing. He read on the sand the names of the boy's father and mother. He read the story of his life up to that point, his childhood games, the cold nights in the religious school. He read things the boy had never told anyone, like the time he secretly took his father's weapon to hunt alone, or his first sexual experience with himself. The old man said, "I am the king of Salem." The boy asked, "And why would a king speak to a shepherd?" He was deeply puzzled and agitated. There are several reasons for that, but let's say the most important one is that you have managed to achieve your own personal legend. The shepherd didn't know what a personal legend was. It's what you've always wished to do. Each of us knows in our youth what our personal legend is. At that age, everything is clear and anything is possible. One doesn't fear knowing or pursuing whatever they desire in life. But over time, a mysterious force begins to make us doubt whether it is possible to achieve our personal legend. The boy didn't really understand what the old man was saying. However, he wanted to know what these mysterious forces were that would allow him to impress the merchant's daughter. These forces may seem difficult, but in reality, they teach you how to achieve your personal legend. They are the ones that sharpen your soul and will, because there is one great truth in this world. No matter who you are or what you do, when you truly desire something, that desire is born in the soul of the world. That is your mission on earth. Even if a person just wants to travel, or marry a merchant's daughter, or search for a treasure, the soul of the world feeds on human happiness, or it feeds on their misery, envy, and jealousy. A person's only obligation is to achieve their personal legend. Everything in the world is connected. When you desire something, the whole universe conspires to help you achieve that desire. They fell silent and began to watch the square and the people passing by. The old man was the first to speak. "Why do you keep your silence?" "Because I love traveling." He pointed toward a popcorn vendor who was standing in a corner of the square near a small cart with red paint and said, "This man also always wanted to travel when he was a child, but he decided to buy a small cart to sell popcorn and save money over the years. When he becomes an old man, he will go spend a month in Africa. He never understood that there is always an opportunity for a person to do what they dream of. The boy thought aloud. He could choose to become a shepherd. He had often thought about that, but popcorn vendors are higher in status than shepherds. Popcorn vendors have roofs over their heads while shepherds sleep out in the open. People prefer to marry their daughters to popcorn vendors rather than to shepherds. The young man felt a tightness in his heart as he remembered the merchant's daughter. Surely there is a popcorn vendor in the city where she lives. In the end, the opinion of people about popcorn vendors and shepherds becomes more important to them than pursuing their personal legend. The old man flipped through the book and amused himself by reading a page. The young man waited a moment, then interrupted him in the same way the old man had interrupted him. "Why are you telling me these things?" "Because you are trying to live your personal legend, and because you are about to give it up, and you always appear at this moment." Not always like this, but I have never failed. Sometimes I appear in the form of a good idea that solves the problem, and sometimes I act at a decisive moment to make things easier and so on, but people don't notice anything. And he told a story about how, last week, he had to appear to a gemstone prospector in the form of a stone. The man had abandoned everything to search for emeralds. He worked for 5 years along a river, breaking 99,999 stones in an attempt to find an emerald. At that moment, he thought of giving up, as only one stone remained before he would find his emerald. Since the man had been faithful to his personal legend, the old man decided to intervene. He transformed into a stone and rolled at the prospector's feet. In a storm of frustration, the man, feeling the weight of 5 wasted years, threw the stone away with great force. But the stone collided with another, breaking it open and revealing the most beautiful emerald in the world. The old man said with a kind of sorrow in his eyes, "People realize their purpose too early, and perhaps that is why they give it up. It's tricky too, but that's how the world works." At that moment, the boy also remembered that the starting point of their conversation was important. The old man said, "The one who reveals the treasure is the floodwaters that redirect it, and those very waters that help guide it. If you want to know more about your treasure, you must show me 1/10 of your flock." "Won't it work if I give you 1/10 of the treasure?" Frustration appeared on the old man's face as he said, "If you start by counting what you don't have, you'll lose the desire to obtain it." When the shepherd told him that he had promised 1/10 of the treasure to the merchant's daughter, the old man sighed and said, "The merchant's daughter is clever. In any case, it's important that you learn that everything in life has a price, and that's what the Knights of the Light try to teach people." Then the old man handed the book back to the boy and said, "Tomorrow, at this hour, bring me 1/10 of your flock, and I will show you how to succeed in finding the hidden treasure. Now go," he said, and then disappeared through one of the corners of the square.
The young man tried to resume reading but couldn't concentrate. He was agitated and tense because he realized the old man had told the truth. He went to the street vendor and bought a bag of popcorn, all the while asking himself whether or not he should tell him what the old man had said. He thought that sometimes it's better to leave things as they are, and so he said nothing. If he spoke, the popcorn seller would spend 3 days thinking about giving up everything, even though he had already grown used to his small cart. He could spare him this painful confusion. He wandered around the city and eventually went down to the port. There was a small building with a ticket window at the front, and people were approaching it to buy tickets. "Egypt is in Africa." The clerk at the window asked him, "What do you want?" He replied as he walked away, "Maybe tomorrow." If he sold just 1 sheep from his flock, he could cross over to Africa on the other side. That thought terrified him. The clerk said to his colleague, "There goes another dreamer," and added, as the young man walked away, "He doesn't have enough to pay for the trip." He thought about his sheep while standing at the window, and fear crept in at the thought of returning to them. Over the past 2 years, he had learned everything about raising sheep. He learned how to shear their wool, care for the pregnant ones, and protect the flock from wolves. He knew everything about the right price to buy and sell each one of them. He decided to return to his friend's barn by the longest route. There was also a palace in this city, so he decided to climb the stone-paved path leading to it and sit on the wall from where he could glimpse Africa. And someone had explained to him that the Moors had come by this route and that they had occupied all of Spain for a long time. He hated the Moors, for they were the ones who had brought the gypsies. From up high, he could also see the largest part of the city, including the square where he had spoken with the old man. He said to himself, "Cursed be the moment I met that old man. I had simply gone to a woman who could interpret dreams, but neither she nor the old man cared at all that I was a shepherd. They were two lonely people who no longer believed in anything in life, and they didn't understand that shepherds end up getting attached to their sheep." He knew each one of them deeply. He could tell if one was limping, which would give birth in 2 months, and which was the laziest. He also knew how to shear their wool and how to slaughter them, and if he decided to leave, they would suffer. The wind began to blow, and he knew this wind. They called it the Eastern Wind, because it was the wind that had carried the invaders. But he had never imagined, before knowing Tarifa, that Africa was this close, and that was a real danger. The Moors could invade the land again. The eastern wind grew stronger, and he thought, here I am, torn between my sheep and the treasure. He had to make a decision, to choose between something he was used to and something he longed to possess. There was also the merchant's daughter, but she wasn't as important as the sheep, because she didn't depend on him. And he was certain that if he didn't see the girl for 2 days, she wouldn't even notice, for to her, all days were the same. And when all days are the same, it means that people have stopped noticing the good things that happen in their lives as the sun crosses the sky. And he said to himself, I have left behind my father and mother and the castle in the town where I was born. They got used to it, and so did I. The sheep will be fine too while I'm away. He watched the square from above. The street vendor was still selling popcorn, and a young man and woman sat on the bench where he had spoken with the old man, sharing a long kiss. He whispered to himself, the popcorn seller, and didn't finish the sentence, because the eastern wind began to blow strongly, and he felt it strike his face. That wind had certainly brought the Moors, but it had also brought the scent of the desert and the veiled women. It carried the sweat of men and their dreams, those who once went out in search of the unknown, in search of gold and adventure, and the pyramids. The young man began to envy the wind for its freedom, and he realized that he could be like it. Nothing stopped him, except himself. The sheep, the merchant's daughter, the fields of Andalusia, they were only steps along the path to his personal legend. The next day the shepherd went to meet the old man, taking 6 sheep with him. He said, I'm surprised. My friend bought the flock right away. He told me he had spent his whole life dreaming of being a shepherd, so this must be a good omen. The old man replied, That's how it always is. We call it the principle of favourability. When you play cards for the first time, you're almost sure to win. It's beginner's luck. And why is that? Because life wants you to live your personal legend. Then the old man began inspecting the 6 sheep, and he noticed that one of them was limping. The young man explained that it didn't matter, because that was the smartest sheep in the flock and produced a lot of wool. Then he asked, Where is the treasure? The treasure is in Egypt, near the pyramids. The young man was stunned. The gypsy woman had said the same thing, but she hadn't asked for a fee. To reach the treasure, you must pay attention to the omens. God has written a path in the world for each of us to follow. All you have to do is read what he has written for you. And before the young man could reply, a butterfly fluttered between him and the old man, and he remembered. At that moment, he remembered how his grandfather used to tell him when he was a child that butterflies were a sign of good luck, just like crickets, green grasshoppers, little grey lizards, and 4-leaf clovers. The old man, who could read his thoughts, continued, That's right, just as your grandfather taught you. The omens are there. Then he opened the cloak he was wrapped in, and the boy was stunned by what he saw, recalling the flash of light that had dazzled him the day before. The old man was wearing a thick golden breastplate, completely encrusted with precious stones. So he really was a king, and must be disguised this way to avoid thieves. The old man took 2 stones from the center of his breastplate, one white and one black, and handed them to the boy, saying, "Take these. They're called Urim and Thummim. The black one means yes, and the white one means no. When you can't read the omens, they'll help. But always ask clear, objective questions, and generally try to make your own decisions. The treasure is near the pyramids, and you already know that. But the price you paid, 6 sheep, was because I helped you make the decision." The boy put the 2 stones into his pouch and decided to start making his own decisions from that moment on. Don't forget that everything is just one thing. Don't forget the language of omens. And above all, don't forget to follow through to the end of your personal legend. But before you go, I'd like to tell you a short story. It is said that a merchant once sent his son to learn the secret of happiness from the wisest man on earth. The boy wandered through the desert for 40 days before finally reaching a beautiful castle atop a mountain where the wise man lived. But instead of finding a saintly man, our story's hero found himself in a bustling hall. Merchants came and went, people were talking in the corners, a small orchestra played soft music, and a table was laden with the most delicious food of that part of the world. The wise man spoke with everyone, and the boy had to wait for 2 hours before his turn came. The wise man listened attentively to the boy's reason for visiting, but told him he didn't have time at the moment to explain the secret of happiness. He suggested the boy take a tour of the palace and return in 2 hours. Then the wise man added, handing the boy a teaspoon with 2 drops of oil in it, "But I want to ask you for a favor. Hold this spoon in your hand as you go on your tour, and be careful not to spill the oil." The boy began to climb up and down the palace stairs, keeping his eyes fixed on the spoon the whole time. When the 2 hours had passed, he returned to the wise man, who asked him, "So, did you see the Persian rugs in the dining hall? Did you see the garden that the master gardener spent 10 years creating? Did you notice the beautiful volumes in my library?" The boy was embarrassed and had to admit that he had seen none of those things. His only concern had been not to spill the drops of oil entrusted to him. So the wise man said, "Then go back and discover the marvels of my world. You cannot trust a man if you do not know the house he lives in." The boy felt calmer now, so he took the spoon and went back to explore the palace, this time paying attention to all the works of art on the walls and hanging from the ceiling. He saw the garden and the surrounding mountains, the delicate flowers, and the fine detail with which each piece of art had been placed in its proper location. When he returned to the wise man, he described in detail everything he had seen. The wise man then asked, "But where are the 2 drops of oil I entrusted to you?" The boy then looked at the spoon and noticed that the oil had spilled. The wise man said to him, "Then that is the only advice I can give you. The secret to happiness is to see the wonders of the world, but never spill the 2 drops of oil from your spoon." The shepherd remained silent, having understood the king's story. The shepherd may love to travel, but he never forgets his sheep. The wise man watched the boy, and with his outstretched palms, he made strange movements over his head, then gathered his sheep and left. He had a view of the small town of Tarifa, an old fortress built by the Moors long ago. From its wall one could see a square, a popcorn vendor, and part of Africa. That night, Melchizedek, the king of Salem, sat on the castle wall, and the wind called, the eastern wind blew on his face. The sheep near him kept moving restlessly, disturbed by the change of their shepherd and all the movement. All they wanted was to find something to eat and drink. Melchizedek watched the small boat as it sailed away from the port. The young shepherd would never again be the same, just as he would never see Abraham after he made him pay the tithes. Yet that was his job. The gods should not have desires, because gods have no personal legend, but from the bottom of his heart he wished success for that young man. King Melchizedek thought, "What a pity, for he will soon forget my name. I should have made him repeat it several times, so that when he spoke of me he could say, 'I am Melchizedek, king of Salem.'" He lifted his eyes to the sky with guilt for such thoughts and said, "Yes, I know this is pride, and it's all vanity, as you said, Jesus. But an old king is allowed to take pride in himself sometimes. Ah, Africa, such a strange land. So thought the young man as he sat in a cafe, much like the others he had seen as he walked through the narrow alleys of the city. The men were smoking giant pipes, passing them from mouth to mouth. In just a few hours he had seen men walking hand in hand, women with veiled faces, elders climbing tall towers to call out, and men kneeling and touching their foreheads to the ground. What a strange place. He had seen as a child in his village church a statue of St. James the Greater on his white horse, holding his spear toward people who looked like these people, and he felt uneasy, thinking their gazes were frightening. Moreover, in the midst of the great rush to leave, he had forgotten one very small detail. It was something that could indeed keep him away from his treasure for a long time, that all the people in this country spoke Arabic. The cafe owner approached him and pointed with his finger to a drink he saw him serving on another table. It turned out to be tea, and also a bitter kind, though he preferred to drink wine. But this was certainly not the moment to think about such things. Wasn't he supposed to be thinking only about his treasure and how he would get his hands on it? After selling his flock, he had managed to put a large sum of money in his pocket. And he knew that money was something magical, for a person is never truly alone when they have money. And after a short time, perhaps just a few days, he would be at the foot of the pyramids. A sheikh who possessed all that gold glittering on his chest didn't need to fabricate lies to get 6 sheep. The old king spoke to him about the signs, and throughout the crossing of the strait, he kept thinking about the signs. Yes, he knew exactly what the king was talking about, for he had spent all the time in the Andalusian countryside learning to read the signs on the ground and in the sky, signs of the path he should take. He had learned that this bird reveals the presence of a nearby snake, and that this bush indicates water a few kilometers away. The sheep had taught him these things. He told himself that if God guides the sheep this way, he would guide humans too. He felt reassured, and the tea seemed less bitter. Then he heard someone ask him in Spanish, "Who are you?" He felt a great sense of relief, as he had been thinking about the signs, and someone appeared before him. "How do you know Spanish?" The newcomer was a young man dressed in Western clothes, but his skin color suggested he was from the city. He was about the same height and age as the young shepherd. "Here, almost everyone speaks Spanish. We're only a few hours away from Spain." "Sit down and order something on my account. Get me some wine. I can't stand this tea. There is no wine here. Religion forbids it." The young man then said that he had to go to the pyramids. He was about to speak of the treasure, but in the end he chose to remain silent. This Arab could ask for a part of the treasure in exchange for guiding him there. He remembered what the sheik had told him. "I want you to take me there, and I can pay you as a guide. Do you have any idea how to get there?" At that moment, he noticed that the cafe owner was standing nearby, listening attentively to what they were saying. The young man felt slightly embarrassed by his presence, but he had found a guide and wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. The newcomer said to him, "You must cross the entire desert, and to do that, you need money. I'd like to know if you have enough." The young man found the question curious, but he trusted the sheikh, who had told him that when you truly desire something, the whole world conspires to help you. He took out his money from his pocket and showed it to his new companion. The cafe owner approached, looked at the money as well, and exchanged a few words with the newcomer in Arabic. The cafe owner seemed angry. The young man said, "Let's leave here. He doesn't want us to stay." He felt more reassured now, so he got her up to pay what he owed, but the cafe owner grabbed his arm and started speaking in a long, continuous stream of words without a moment's pause. The young man was strong, but he was in a foreign land, and his companion was the one who had paid. The cafe owner moved aside and led him out, saying, "He wanted your money. Tangier is not like the rest of Africa. Here we are at a port. And ports are usually dens of thieves." Now he could trust his new friend, who had come to his aid when he was in a tight spot. He took the money from his pocket and started counting it. The other man, as he took the money, said, "We can be at the foot of the pyramids tomorrow, but I need to buy 2 camels." Then they walked together through the narrow alleys of Tangier. Every corner and nook was crowded with goods for sale. Finally they reached the heart of the large square where the market was held. There were thousands of people arguing, selling, and buying, vegetables and daggers side by side, along with carpets and trinkets of all kinds. The young man kept his eyes on his new companion. He hadn't forgotten that he was now carrying all his wealth. He thought about asking him to return it, but he judged that this would be poor taste. He didn't know the customs of this foreign land that he had just set foot in. He thought, "It's enough that I observe him. He's sturdier than the other man." Suddenly, amidst the enormous crowd, his eyes landed on the most beautiful sword. The weapon was silver, and its hilt was black, studded with precious stones. He promised himself that he would buy this sword upon his return from Egypt, so he said to his companion, "Ask the merchant about its price." But he realized that he had neglected it for 2 seconds while he was admiring the weapon. His heart tightened as though his chest had shrunk in size, and he feared to look away, knowing what awaited him. He kept his eyes on the magnificent sword for a moment, then mustered up the courage and turned. People were all around him in the square, coming and going, shouting, buying carpets, walnuts, green salads, and copper trays. There were men holding hands, veiled women, and the scents of spicy goods. But nowhere at all, was the shadow of his companion. Nevertheless, he wanted to believe that his companion had gotten lost by chance, and decided to stay in place, hoping he would return. After a while, someone climbed one of the towers and began chanting. Everyone around him began to kneel, touch their foreheads to the ground, and chant in turn. Then, as if they were a kingdom of ants at work, they began dismantling their platforms and left. The sun set, and the young man watched it for a long time until it disappeared behind the white houses surrounding the square. And he thought that when this same sun had risen in the morning, he was in another continent, a shepherd, owning 60 sheep and having an appointment with one of the girls. In the morning, he knew everything that could happen while crossing the countryside. But now, with the sun setting, he was in a foreign land, where he couldn't even understand the language spoken by the people. He was no longer a shepherd, and he no longer owned anything, not even the money needed to return and start over. He told himself all this between the sunrise and sunset, and began to lament his situation, thinking that things change in life within a brief moment, even before a person has enough time to get used to things. He felt ashamed to cry, as he had never cried in front of his sheep, but the market square was vast, and he was far from his homeland. And he cried. He cried because the sky was not fair, and because it rewarded those who believed in their dreams in this way. When I was with my sheep, I was happy, and I shared my happiness with everyone around me. People would see me coming and greet me warmly. But now I am sad and miserable. What will happen to me? I will become someone who has been deceived, and will not trust anyone, because someone has tricked me. I will resent everyone who found hidden treasures because I didn't find mine, and I will always be cautious with the little I own, because I'm afraid to change my fate. He opened his pouch to see what was inside, hoping there would be another bite of the sandwich he had eaten on the back of the boat was not there. Instead, he found only the large book, the coat, and the 2 stones the old man had given him. When he saw these 2 stones, he felt a great sense of relief. He had exchanged 6 of his sheep for 2 precious stones taken from a golden shield. He could sell them and use the proceeds to buy a return ticket. He told himself, from now on, I will be more cautious, and he took the stones out of his pouch to put them in his pocket. This is a port, and the only true thing that person said was that ports are always full of thieves. Only now did he understand the desperate attempts of the cafe owner. He was trying to tell him not to trust this person, but like everyone else, I see the world the way I want it to be, not as it really is. He continued to examine the stones, gently feeling each one, sensing their warmth and the smoothness of their texture. They were now his treasure, and they reminded him of the old man and what he had told him. When you want something sincerely, the whole world conspires to help you get it. He wished he could understand how that could be true. Here he was, in an empty marketplace with nothing, and he didn't have a flock to tend to at night. But the 2 stones were proof that he had met a king who knew his life story, what he had done with his father's weapon, and even his first sexual experience. Moreover, these 2 stones helped with divination, and their names were Urim and Thummim. He placed them in their place in the bag and decided to try the experiment. The old man had told him to ask specific questions because the stones didn't. The stones only work if a person knows what they want. So the young man asked whether the old man's blessing was still upon him, then pulled one of the stones, and it was a yes. He then asked, "Will I find my treasure?" He put his hand into the pouch, about to pull out one of the stones when they both slipped out together through a hole in the fabric. He had never noticed that his pouch was torn. He bent down to pick up Urim and Thummim and put them back into the bag, but when he saw them on the ground, another phrase the old king had said came back to him. "Learn to respect the signs and follow them." A sign! The young man began to laugh to himself, and then placed the stones back into the pouch. He had no intention of sewing it up. The stones could fall out of that hole whenever they wished. He realized there were some things he shouldn't ask about, so as not to escape his destiny, and he said to himself, "I promised I would make my decisions on my own." But the stones told him that the old man was always with him, and this answer gave him confidence. He looked again at the empty marketplace and no longer felt the despair he once had. This was no longer a strange world. It had become a new world. Finally, wasn't this exactly what he had wanted? To know new worlds? Even if he never reached the pyramids, he had already gone much farther than any shepherd he knew. Oh, if they only knew that less than 2 hours away by boat, all these different things existed. The new world now appeared to him as an empty market, but he had already seen this place buzzing with life, and he would never forget it. He remembered the sword. He had paid dearly to admire it for a moment, but he had never seen anything like it before. Suddenly, he had the feeling that he could view the world either as a hapless victim of some thief, or as an adventurer in search of treasure. And he thought, before drifting into sleep from exhaustion, "I am an adventurer searching for treasure." He was awakened by a hand shaking his shoulder, and he had fallen asleep in the middle of the market square, which was now starting to regain its life. He looked around, searching for his sheep, then realized he was now in a new world. Instead of feeling sad, he felt happiness. He no longer had to search for water and food. Now he could begin searching for his treasure. He had chosen the night before to become an adventurer like the characters from the books he used to read. He began strolling through the square slowly. The vendors had started setting up their stalls, and he helped a man who was selling sweets set up his stall. What distinguished that man's face was a smile different from the others. He had a pleasant face, open to life, and ready to welcome a good day of work. His smile somehow reminded him of the sheikh, that mysterious king, and he said to himself, "This vendor isn't making sweets because he wants to leave or marry the daughter of a merchant. No, he makes sweets because he loves this profession." That's how the young man thought, and he noticed that he could do like the sheikh, know whether a person is close to or far from their self-legend. All he had to do was look at that person, and he said to himself, "It's easy, but I never noticed it before." And when they finished setting up the stall, the man offered him the first piece of sweet he had made, which the young man devoured with delight. He thanked him and continued on his way. After walking a little farther, it occurred to him that 2 people were the ones who set up the stall. One spoke Arabic, and the other spoke Spanish. However, these 2 people seemed to understand each other perfectly, and he said to himself, "There is a language that transcends words. I had already known that with the sheep, and now I know it with men." Here he is then, on his way to knowing many new things, things he had experienced before, but they are new nonetheless, because they crossed his path without him paying attention to them, as he had grown used to them. If I were to understand the essence of this language that transcends words, I would understand the essence of the world. He decided to stroll leisurely through the streets of Tangier, for this is the only way he would succeed in delving into the meanings of the signs. This undoubtedly requires a great deal of patience, but patience is the first of the virtues that a shepherd learns. Once again, he realized that he was applying the same lessons he had learned from his sheep in this strange land. The sheikh had said, "All things are one thing." The crystal seller saw the day dawn and felt the same sense of anxiety that gripped him every morning. He had spent nearly 30 years in this same place, in a shop located at the top of an ascending street, where a customer rarely passed by. Now time had passed too much to change anything, for all he had learned in his life was to sell crystal pieces. There was a time when his shop had been popular with many people, traders from the Arabs, French and English geologists, and German soldiers whose pockets were always full of money. At that time, selling crystal had been a successful adventure. He imagined how he would become a wealthy man, and he imagined the crowds of beautiful women who would be his. But time slowly passed, just like the city itself. Ceuta flourished more than Tangier, and trade had taken a different course. The neighbours left in search of other places, and only a few shops remained on that hill, and it was impossible for many people to climb an uphill path for a few miserable shops. But the crystal merchant had no choice. He had spent 30 years of his life buying and selling crystal pieces, and it was too late to change direction. He spent the whole day watching the few passers-by in the narrow street, and this was what he had done for many years, so he came to know the habits of each of the passers-by. Just minutes before lunchtime, a foreign young man stopped in front of the glass storefront. He was dressed in ordinary clothes like everyone else, but the crystal merchant's trained eyes saw that he was penniless. Despite that, he decided to go back inside his shop and wait a few minutes until the young man left. There was a sign hanging on the door that said they spoke several languages here, and the young man saw someone emerge from behind the sales table. The person said to him, "I can clean these vases if you want. No one will buy them in their current condition." The seller looked at him without saying anything, so the young man added, "In exchange you will pay me for a meal." The man remained silent, and the young man understood that it was up to him to make a decision. In his bag he had a coat that he wouldn't need in the desert, so he took it out and began cleaning the vases. Within half an hour, he had cleaned all the crystal in the display window. During this time, 2 customers entered and bought a lot from him. When he finished cleaning everything, he asked the shop owner for some food. The crystal seller said, "Let's go have lunch together." He hung a sign on the door, and they went together to a very small cafeteria at the top of the hill. As soon as they sat down at the only table in the place, the crystal seller, smiling, said, "There was no need for you to clean anything. The Quranic law dictates offering food to any hungry person. So why did you let me do this work? Because the crystal was dirty, and because you and I needed to clean our minds of bad thoughts." After they finished their meal, the crystal seller turned to the young man and said, "I would like you to work in my shop. Today, 2 customers came in while you were cleaning the crystal, and that's a good omen." The shepherd thought that people talked a lot about signs, but they didn't really know exactly what they were talking about, just like me, when I never noticed that I had been talking to my sheep for years with a language without words. The seller insisted on asking, "Do you want to work with me?" "I can work for the rest of the day. I'll clean all the crystal in the shop until dawn, and in return you'll give me money so that I can be in Egypt tomorrow." Suddenly, the old man burst out laughing. "Even if you cleaned all the crystal in my shop for an entire year, and even if you took a nice commission for selling each piece, you would still need to borrow money to get to Egypt, because between Tangier and the pyramids there are thousands of kilometers of desert." At that moment, a silence fell, as if the whole city had suddenly fallen asleep. There were no more shops. The discussions between traders had ended, and the calls of men climbing the minarets had ceased, as well as the beautiful swords with handles inlaid with mother-of-pearl. The hope for adventure, kings, sheikhs, and self-made legends had ended. Goodbye to treasure, and goodbye to the pyramids. It seemed as though silence had afflicted the entire world, because the spirit of the young man had fallen into silence. There was no pain, no suffering, no disappointment. Just an empty gaze through the small cafeteria door, and a desperate desire for death, and to see everything end at that very moment. The seller looked at him in amazement. It seemed as though all the energy he had seen in the morning had suddenly evaporated. The crystal seller said, "I can give you money to return to your country." The young man remained silent, then stood up, adjusted his clothes, grabbed his bag and said, "I will work for you." After another moment of silence, he finished his statement saying, "I need some money to buy sheep." Almost a month had passed since the young man started working for the crystal merchant without finding much satisfaction in the work. The merchant would not stop muttering all day from behind his table, advising him to be careful when handling the crystal pieces so that nothing would break. But he continued his work anyway, because the crystal merchant, though always grumbling, was at least fair with his worker, who had gotten a good commission for every sold piece, and he was able to save some money. He did his calculations that morning. If he continued to work like this every day, it would take him an entire year to afford a few sheep. The young man said to his employer, "I would like us to set up a crystal display outside, and we can place a shelf holder outside to attract passers-by from the bottom of the road." "I have never done anything like this before. People might bump into the shelf holder while passing by, and the crystal might break. When I used to roam the countryside with my sheep, it was always possible that one of them might fall victim to a snake bite, but this danger is part of the life of sheep and shepherds." The merchant went to serve a customer who wanted to buy 3 crystal vases. He was now selling much more than before, as if time had turned back to the days when the street was one of the main attractions in Tangier. After the customer left, he said to his worker, "People are now constantly coming to us, and what we earn is enough for me to live a better life and to buy sheep again in a short time. So why ask the world for more?" The young man replied without thinking, "Because we must follow the signs." Then he regretted what he said, because the merchant had never had the chance to meet a king who spoke about the principle of suitability, about the luck of beginners, and about the self-myth. However, the merchant understood what his worker was talking about. Just his presence in the shop was a sign, and he had never regretted hiring the Spanish young man after the money started flowing in day after day. Since he had long believed that his sales would never increase, he now offered the young man a high commission. His intuition told him that the boy would soon leave to join his sheep. To change the subject from the display case story, he asked him, "Why do you want to go see the pyramids?" "Because I've heard a lot about them." He avoided talking about his dream, as the treasure had now become a painful memory he struggled not to recall. The merchant said, "I don't know anyone here who would cross the desert just to see the pyramids. They are just a pile of stones, and you can build a pyramid like that in your garden." "You never dreamed of travelling?" The young man said it, and then went to serve another customer who had entered the shop. 2 days later, the old man returned to talk about the display case with the young man. "I don't like change much. Neither you nor I are like Hassan, that rich merchant. If he makes a mistake in some of his purchases, it won't cause him much harm. But the 2 of us must bear the consequences of our mistakes." The young man thought, "That is true." And the merchant asked him, "Why do you want to set up this display?" "I want to return to my sheep as quickly as possible. When luck is on our side, we must seize the opportunity and do everything we can to help it, just as it helps us. This is what they call the principle of suitability or beginner's luck." The old man remained silent for a moment and then said, "Our Prophet taught us the Quran, which only asks us to follow 5 obligations for life. The most important of them all is, there is no God but Allah. And the other 4 obligations are performing 5 prayers a day, fasting during Ramadan, and the duty of zakat for the poor." Then he fell silent. His eyes filled with tears as he spoke about the Prophet. Islam was a man who filled his heart with faith, and although at times he seemed to be a critic of patience, he worked hard to live in accordance with the laws of Islam. The young man asked him, "And what is the 5th obligation?" "You told me 2 days ago that I never dreamed of travelling, but the 5th obligation for every believing Muslim is to travel on a journey." For we must travel at least once in our lifetime to the sacred land of Mecca, and Mecca is far beyond the pyramids. But when I was young, I thought of investing the little money I had into opening this shop, hoping to one day become rich enough to travel to Mecca. In fact, I began to make money, but I could not trust anyone with the crystal because crystal is fragile. During this time, I saw many people passing by this shop on their way to Mecca. There were the wealthy pilgrims, accompanied by a crowd of servants and riding many camels, but the majority were people much poorer than me. All of them travelled and returned happy, hanging their pilgrimage slogans on the doors of their homes. One of them was a cobbler who made his living by repairing people's souls. He told me he had walked for nearly a year through the desert to perform the pilgrimage, but he felt even more tired when he had to walk a short distance in Tangier to buy leather. Why don't you go to Mecca now? Because Mecca is what keeps me alive. It gives me the strength to endure all those similar days, the vases on the shelves, and the lunch and dinner in that sleepy little cafe. I am afraid that if I fulfill my dream, I will have nothing left to live for. You dream of sheep and the pyramids, and you're not like me because you want to fulfill your dream. As for me, all I want is to dream of Mecca. I have indeed imagined thousands of times crossing the desert, reaching the place of the sacred stone, walking around it 7 times, and touching it. I have imagined who will be by my side, who will be in front of me, and the takbirs and prayers we will say together. But I am afraid of a great disappointment, to the point that I prefer to limit myself to the dream. And on that very day, the merchant allowed the young man to set up the display. Not everyone can look at their dreams in the same way. 2 months passed, and the display window attracted many customers to the crystal shop. The young man estimated that if he worked for another 6 months, he could return to Spain and buy 60 sheep, and even 60 more on top of that. Thus, he would have doubled his flock in less than a year, and he could trade with the Arabs since he had succeeded in learning their foreign language. Since that fateful morning in the market square, he had not used the Urim and Thummim, because Egypt had become for him as distant a dream as Mecca had been for the crystal merchant. However, he was now content with his job, and he couldn't stop dreaming of the day he would dock on the land of Tarifa victorious. The old king had told him, "Remember, you must always know what you want." And now he knew what he wanted and was working toward his goal. Perhaps his treasure was his arrival in this foreign land, falling into the clutches of a thief, and doubling his flock of sheep without spending anything. He was proud of himself, for he had learned important things, such as the crystal trade, the language without words, and the signs. One afternoon he saw a man at the top of the hill complaining that there was no suitable place to drink something after climbing the steep path. The young man now understood the language of signs, so he went to his employer and said, "We should serve tea to the people who climb up here. There are many places here where tea can be served, but we can serve it in crystal cups. People will taste the tea this way, and they will want to buy the crystal because what truly attracts people is beauty." نظر التاجر إلى عامله فترة دون أن يقول شيئا، ولكنه في ذلك المساء نفسه بعد أن أدى صلاته وأغلق المحل جلس على الرصيف ودعاه إلى أن يدخن معه النرجيلة، ذلك الغليون العجيب الذي يدخنه العرب. ثم سأل تاجر الكريستال العجوز الشاب: "ما الذي تسعى وراءه؟" "قلت لك من قبل، أحتاج إلى أن أشتري قطيعا جديدة، ولهذا يلزمني بعض المال." وضع الرجل العجوز مزيدا من الجمر في النرجيلة، ثم سحب نفسا طويلا قبل أن يقول: "منذ 30 عاما وأنا أملك هذا المحل. أعرف الكريستال الجيد من الرديء، وأعرف أدق أسرار التجارة، وقد اعتدت على محلي وعلى حجمه وعلى زبائنه. ولو بدأت تبيع الشاي في أكواب من الكريستال فستتوسع التجارة، ويجب أن أغير أنا أيضا أسلوبي في الحياة. أولن يكون هذا شيئا طيبا؟ لقد ألفت حياتي. قبل أن تأتي أنت كنت أفكر في أني ضيعت عمري في المكان نفسه، في حين أن كل أصدقائي تغيروا، انهارت تجارتهم أو ازدهرت، وكان هذا يشعرني بحزن شديد. أما الآن فأنا أعرف أن الأمر ليس هكذا في الحقيقة، وأن المحل في الوضع نفسه الذي أردته له بالضبط. أنا لا أريد التغيير، لأنني لا أعرف كيف أتغير، ومنذ الآن أعرف نفسي. ولم يعرف الشاب بما يرد، فاستأنف العجوز: لقد كنت بالنسبة لي نعمة، وها أنا اليوم أدرك شيئا، أن كل نعمة مرفوضا تتحول نقمة. لست أنتظر من الحياة المزيد، وأنت تغريني على أن ألتمس ثروات وآفاقا لم تخطر ببالي قط. والآن إذ أعرفها وأعرف إمكانياتي الهائلة، فسأشعر بتعاسة أكثر من أي وقت مضى، لأني أعرف أني يمكن أن أملك كل شيء، بينما أنا لا أريد. قال الشاب لنفسه: من حسن الحظ أنني لم أقل شيئا لبائع الفشار. استمر يدخنان النرجيلة حتى بعد أن غربت الشمس، وكان يتبادلان الحديث بالعربية، وشعر الشاب بالرضا عن نفسه لأنه يتحدث العربية. جاء وقت كان يعتقد فيه أن شياه يمكن أن تعلمه كل شيء في الحياة، لكن الشياه لا تعرف العربية. وفكر وهو يراقب التاجر دون أن يقول شيئا: لا بد وأن هناك في الحياة أشياء أخرى لا تستطيع الشياه أن تعلمها، لأنها لا تبحث عن شيء غير الماء والغذاء. أعتقد أنها ليست هي التي تعلم، وإنما أنا الذي أتعلم. وأخيرا قال التاجر: مكتوب. ما معنى هذه الكلمة؟ لا بد وأن تكون قد ولدت عربيا لكي تفهمها. ترجمتها لا تعني شيئا، تعني أنه شيء مدون. وبينما كان يطفئ جمر الترجيلة، قال للشاب إنه يستطيع أن يبدأ في تقديم الشاي للزبائن في أكواب الكريستال. في بعض الأحيان يكون من المستحيل أن تسيطروا على نهر الحياة. The people were climbing the uphill road and reaching its peak exhausted, where they found a shop with beautiful crystal pieces and refreshing mint tea. When they entered to drink the tea, it was served in exquisite crystal cups. One of them said, "This idea has never occurred to my wife," and then bought several crystal cups because he had guests that night and would impress them with the richness of the cups. Another customer confirmed that the tea tastes better when served in crystal cups because they preserve the flavor. A third customer mentioned that it was customary in the East to serve tea in crystal due to its magical properties. And so the news spread quickly, and people began to climb the hill to see the shop that had introduced this novelty in such an ancient trade. Other shops soon opened, offering tea in crystal cups, but they were not on top of a hill. So they remained empty. Before long, the merchant had to hire new workers and import large quantities of tea along with the crystal, as more and more thirsty men and women sought new things every day. Thus 6 months passed. The young man woke up before sunrise, and it had been 11 months and 9 days since he first set foot in Africa. He was wearing the white linen Arabic robe he had bought specifically for this occasion, with a turban wrapped around his head, held in place by a camel leather band. Finally, he wore his new sandals and went downstairs without making a sound. The city was still asleep. He made himself a sesame sandwich and drank hot tea from a crystal cup, then sat at the threshold of the shop and began to smoke the hookah alone. He smoked in silence, without thinking of anything, and without hearing anything but the constant hum of the wind that carried the scent of the desert. When he finished, he placed his hand in his pocket and paused for a moment, contemplating what he had pulled out. It was a large sum of money, enough to buy 120 sheep, a return ticket, and a license for export and import between his country and the one he was in. He waited patiently until the old man woke up and came to open the shop. They went to drink tea together. The young man said, "Today I'm leaving. I have enough money to buy the sheep, and you have enough to go to Mecca." The old man didn't say anything, so the young man insisted, "I want your blessing, for you helped me." The old man continued preparing the tea in silence, then turned to the young man after a while and said, "I am proud of you. You've brought life to this crystal shop. But I won't go to Mecca, and you know that well, just as you know that you won't buy any new sheep." The young man asked, stunned, "Who told you this?" "It is written." The old crystal merchant simply said this, then gave the young man his blessing. The young man went to his room and gathered all his belongings, filling 3 large handbags. Just before leaving, he noticed his old pouch, the shepherd's pouch, lying in a corner of the room. He found it in a sorry state after nearly forgetting about it, and inside it he found his book and his coat. He pulled out the coat while thinking of giving it as a gift to the first boy he met on the road, and 2 stones rolled out onto the floor, Urim and Thummim. He remembered the old king and was amazed that he hadn't thought of meeting him for a long time, as he had spent the entire year working tirelessly, not worrying about anything except earning enough money so he wouldn't have to return to Spain with his head bowed. The old man had told him, "Never betray your dreams, and pay attention to the signs." He picked up Urim and Thummim from the floor, and again felt a strange sensation that the old king was near him. He had worked hard all that year, and the signs indicated that the moment of departure had come. He thought, "I will return exactly as I was before, and the sheep did not teach me to speak Arabic." However, the sheep taught him something no less important, that there is a language in the world everyone understands, which he used all that time to revive the crystal shop. That is the language of enthusiasm, or that a person does things with love and passion, for a purpose they wish for or believe in. Tangier no longer seemed a strange city to him, and just as he had opened this place, he could open the world. Didn't the old king tell him, when you want something sincerely, the whole world conspires to help you achieve it? But the old king did not speak about thieves, or vast deserts, or people who know their dreams but do not want to achieve them. The old king did not say that the pyramid is nothing but a pile of stones, and that anyone can build a pile of stones in their garden. He also forgot to say that when a man has enough money to buy a larger flock than before, he must buy it. The young man put the pouch with his other bags and went downstairs, where he found the old man serving 2 foreign customers, while other customers in the shop were drinking tea in crystal cups. It was a good start to a work day at such an early hour in the morning. For the first time from where he stood, he noticed that the crystal merchant's hair was exactly like the old king's hair. He also remembered the candy seller's smile on the first day he arrived in Tangier, when he had no shelter or food. This smile also reminded him of the old king, and he thought as if both these men had had the chance to meet the king at some moment in their lives. The king had said that he always appears to those who live their personal legend. He left without saying goodbye to the crystal merchant. He did not want to cry, but he would regret that period and all the beautiful things he had learned during it. He felt more confident in himself and felt the desire to set out freely into the world. "But I will go to the countryside I already know and tend my sheep again." He no longer felt satisfied with his decision. The dream he had worked for an entire year was losing its importance little by little, minute by minute. Perhaps because this was not his true dream after all. Who knows, maybe it was better for a person to live like the crystal merchant, dreaming without fulfilling his dream. But he held tightly to Urim and Thummim, and these 2 stones infused him with the strength and will of the old king. By pure chance, or perhaps as a sign, he found himself in the cafe he had entered on the first day. The thief was not there, and the cafe owner offered him a cup of tea. He said to himself, "I can always become a shepherd again whenever I want. I have learned how to herd sheep, and I will never forget how it is done. But perhaps I will never get the chance again to go as far as the Egyptian pyramids." There was a golden shield on the old man's chest, and he knew my life story. He was a king, and a wise king. He is now barely 2 hours away by boat from the plains of Andalusia, but between him and the pyramids lie deserts. And he realized he could also look at the matter this way, that the road to his dream has shortened by 2 hours, even if he lost a whole year to gain those 2 hours. I know exactly why I want to return to my sheep. I know them, they don't require much work, and I can love them. But I don't know if I could love the desert, yet it is the desert that stands between me and my treasure. And if I can't find it, I can always return to my country. Besides, life suddenly gave me money and passion, and I have plenty of time, so why not? At that moment, he felt a surge of great enthusiasm. He can always return to being a shepherd. He can always return to being a crystal merchant. Maybe life hides other treasures, but it gave him a recurring dream, and that doesn't happen to everyone. He was completely content as he left the cafe. He remembered that one of the crystal merchant's suppliers brought the crystal through caravans crossing the desert. He held Urim and Thummim in his hands, and here he was returning once again, thanks to these 2 stones, to the path of the treasure. He would lose nothing if he went even as far as Shadar to ask if the pyramids were really that far away. The Englishman was sitting inside a building that smelled of cattle, sweat, and dust, and it was hard to call that place a shed, as it was nothing more than a livestock pen. He said to himself, "I spend my whole life only to end up passing through a place like this." He absent-mindedly flipped through a magazine specialized in chemistry, 10 years of study to find myself in a cattle pen. But he must continue. He must believe in the signs, for his entire life, and all his studies had focused on searching for one language that the world speaks. At first his attention was on Esperanto, then on religions, and he ended up with alchemy. He knew how to speak Esperanto and understood various religions precisely, but he was not yet an alchemist. Without a doubt, he succeeded in deciphering the symbols of important things, but his research had reached a point he could not surpass. He tried unsuccessfully to connect with any alchemist, but alchemists are strange people, thinking only of themselves and always withholding their help. And who knows, perhaps they failed to discover the secret of the great work, the Philosopher's Stone, and maybe this is why they have withdrawn, committed to silence. So far he had spent a large part of the fortune his father left him in a futile pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. He frequented the best libraries in the world, buying the most important and rare works on alchemy. He discovered in one of them that a famous Arab alchemist had visited Europe several years ago. It was said that he was over 200 years old and had discovered the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. This story had a great impact on the Englishman, but it would have remained a mere myth, among many others, if one of his friends had not returned from an archaeological mission in the desert and told him about an extraordinary Arab man who said, "He lives in the Fayum oasis, and people say he is 200 years old and that he can turn any metal into gold." The Englishman's eagerness flared up, and he became immensely excited. He immediately cancelled all his previous commitments, gathered his most important books, and now here he was inside that warehouse that resembled a cattle pen, while a large caravan outside was preparing to cross the desert. And this caravan must cross Fayum. The Englishman thought, "It is inevitable that I meet that damned alchemist." The strong smell of cattle lessened a bit and became more bearable. A young Arab man, also carrying many bundles, entered the building where the Englishman sat, greeted him, and then asked, "Where are you going?" "To the desert." The Englishman replied, then returned to reading. At that moment he had no desire to talk. He needed to recall everything he had learned during 10 years, as the alchemist would undoubtedly impose some sort of test on him. The young Arab took a book and began reading as well. The book was in Spanish, so the Englishman thought, "This is an opportunity. He speaks Spanish better than Arabic, and if this boy is going to Fayum, he will find someone to talk to when not busy with important matters." The young man thought as he tried once again to read the burial scene that begins the story. This is a charming thing, after all. It has been almost 2 years since I started reading this book, but I cannot get past these pages. He couldn't concentrate even though there was no king to interrupt him. He was still hesitant about his decision, but now he realized something important. That decisions are only the beginning of something, and when a person makes a decision, they cast themselves into reality amid a raging current that throws them toward a destiny they never expected, not even in dreams, at the moment they made that decision. When I chose to go search for my treasure, I never imagined I would work in a crystal shop, and likewise, this caravan might be a decision I made, but its end remains a secret. In front of him was a European man reading a book as well, a repulsive person who glanced at him with disdain when he entered. They could have become friends, but the European immediately rejected him. The young man closed his book, unwilling to do anything that might lead anyone to imagine there was any resemblance between him and this European. He pulled out Urim and Thummim from his pocket and began to fidget with the 2 stones. The stranger shouted, "Urim and Thummim." The young man quickly put the stones in his pocket, saying, "They are not for sale. They are not worth much. They are just quartz crystals, and there are millions of quartz crystals on the earth's surface. But these two, those who know them, are Urim and Thummim. I did not know they existed in this region. A king gave them to me as a gift." The stranger remained silent, then put his hand in his pocket and took out 2 stones identical to those with him, shaking as he said, "You mentioned a king." "But you wouldn't believe that a king can speak to a shepherd," said the young man, wishing to end the conversation this time. But the stranger said, "On the contrary, it is not strange for kings to speak to shepherds." At that moment the young man felt happy to be in this place, and the Englishman said, as if thinking aloud, "Maybe this is a sign." "Who told you about signs?" The young man's eagerness increased minute by minute. The Englishman closed the magazine he was reading and said, "Everything in life is a sign. The whole world is covered by one language that all people can understand, but they have forgotten it. I am searching for this universal language among other things. This is why I am here, because I must meet a man who knows this universal language, and he is an alchemist." The conversation was interrupted by the entrance of a stout Arab man to the warehouse, who said, "You are both lucky. A caravan will leave this afternoon to Fayoum." The young man said, "But I want to go to Egypt." The stout Arab replied, "Fayoum is in Egypt." "You seem like a strange Arab, brother." The young man said he was Spanish, and the Englishman felt happy. Though he dressed like an Arab, he was at least European. The Englishman said as the man left, he called signs luck. "If I could, I would write a huge encyclopedia about the words luck and coincidence, for with these 2 words the language of the world is written." Then he continued speaking to the young man. It was no coincidence that he saw him holding the stones of Urim and Thummim, and asked if he too was seeking to meet the semiotician. The young man replied, "I am seeking to find a treasure." Then he immediately felt regret, but the Englishman did not seem to pay much attention to what he heard, and said, "Me too, in a way. And I do not even know what alchemy is." The young man said this just as the head of the shadir entered and invited them to leave. A tall man with a beard and black eyes said, "I am the leader of the caravan, and I have the right to life and death over everyone I lead. Because the desert is a capricious woman who sometimes drives men mad. There were nearly 200 people, and twice as many beasts of burden. There were camels, horses, mules, birds, women, and some men carrying swords at their waists, or long rifles on their shoulders. The Englishman took with him several bags piled with books. The place was noisy, and the leader had to repeat his words several times for everyone to understand. He said, "Here are people from many different backgrounds who believe in different gods in their hearts, but my one God is Allah. And I swear by God that I will do everything I can, and as best as I can, to overcome this desert once more. I only want each of you to swear by the God you believe in, from the depths of your heart, that you will obey me in all circumstances." In the desert, disobedience means death. A soft murmur spread through the crowd, and everyone swore quietly by their God. The young man swore by Christ, and the Englishman remained silent. The murmur lasted longer than a usual oath, as people also sought the protection of the heavens. The sound of a horn sounded and echoed for a long time, and everyone mounted their beasts. The young man and the Englishman had bought 2 camels, and found it difficult to keep their balance on their mounts. The young man felt some pity for the Englishman's camel, burdened with a heavy load of books. The Englishman said, trying to resume the conversation he began at the shadir, "There are no coincidences. There is a friend who made me come here because he knows Arabic." But the caravan started moving, and it became impossible to hear what he was saying. However, the young man understood the meaning perfectly. He meant that mysterious chain that connects everything to everything else, which led him from being a shepherd to working for a crystal merchant. He thought, the closer a person gets to their dream, the more the personal legend becomes the true justification of life. The caravan moved eastward. It travelled in the morning, stopped when the sun grew hot, then resumed when the sun began to set westward. The young man did not talk much with the Englishman, who spent most of his time absorbed in reading his books. Then he became engrossed in watching the procession of beasts and people across the desert. Everything was completely different from the day of departure. That day was full of crowds, shouting, crying children, neighing horses, and mooing cattle. Amid all that chaos were the nervous orders of camel drivers and merchants. But in the desert there was nothing but the eternal winds, silence, and the footsteps of the beasts. Even the guides rarely spoke to each other. One camel driver said one night, "I have crossed these seas of sand many times, but the desert is vast, with distant horizons, making a person feel insignificant and forcing him into silence." The young man understood what the camel driver meant, even though he had never experienced any desert before. But every time he watched the sea or fire, he could spend hours without uttering a word, lost in infinity and the power of the elements. He thought, "I learned with the sheep, I learned with the crystal, and I can also learn with the desert, for it seems older and wiser." The winds never stopped, and he remembered the day he felt those same winds in Tarifa when he sat atop the fortress wall. Perhaps the winds now smoothed the wool of his sheep roaming the lands of Andalusia. He told himself, "They are no longer my sheep," and he did not feel true longing. "They must have gotten used to a new shepherd and forgotten me, and that is perfectly fine." For anyone who gets used to travelling like sheep knows that they always reach a moment where parting is inevitable. Then he remembered the merchant's daughter and became certain she must have married. Perhaps he would be a popcorn seller or a shepherd who can read and tell her exciting stories. He is certainly not the only one. But this intuition that came to him stirred anxiety in his soul. Could it be that he is on his way to learn that famous universal language that knows all human pasts and presents? His mother always said, "Intuition," and he began to understand that moments of intuition are a quick dive of the soul into the cosmic current of life, which holds within it the history of all humans in a way that unites everything, so that we can know everything, because everything is recorded. It is written. He said this thinking about the crystal merchant. The desert sometimes stretched out as sand and at other times as stones, and when the caravan reached a stony area, it would circle around it. If it was a rock mass, a large detour was required. And when the caravan met very soft sand that the camels' feet sank into, they would search for a firmer crossing. Sometimes the ground was covered with salt, where a lake had dried up. The camels suffered, and the guides would get off to help them, carrying their loads on their backs until they crossed the difficult passage, then reloading the camels. When one of the guides fell sick or died, the other guides would draw lots to choose a replacement. All this had only one purpose. It did not matter how many times the caravan's path deviated, as long as it headed toward the same goal. When it overcame an obstacle, it found again the star that guided its journey toward the oasis. When people saw this star shining in the dawn sky, they knew it pointed to where the women, water, palm trees, and dates were. Only the Englishman failed to notice any of this. He spent most of his time buried in reading his books. The young man also had a book which he tried to read in the early days of the journey, but he found greater pleasure in watching the caravan and listening to the winds. Once he learned to control his camel better and grew attached to it, he threw away his book. The book was an unnecessary weight. Yet his soul whispered that every time he opened that book, he met an important person. In the end, he befriended the camel driver who constantly rode beside him and told him about his life. He said, "I live near Kairouan. I had my house, my children, and a stable life that would not have changed until I died. One year, the harvest was better than usual, so we all travelled to Mecca, and I performed the only pilgrimage I still owed. After that, I could have died peacefully, and that made me happy. One day, the earth began to shake, and the Nile overflowed, destroying its bridges. And then something happened to me. I used to think such things only happened to others. My neighbours feared losing their olive groves to the flood. My wife feared the waters would sweep away our children, and I feared losing everything I had built in my life. But what happened was beyond remedy. The land was no longer suitable for farming, and I had to find another way to live. Here I am today, a camel driver, but I have also come to understand God's wisdom. No one should fear the unknown, for every person can change their life and get what they need. All we fear is losing what we have, whether it is our life or our crops. But this fear disappears when we understand that our life and the world's life have been written together by his hand. Glory be to him.
What another needed as a testament to the divine design. The camel drivers would exchange information about sandstorms and gather around the campfires to share stories about the desert. At other times, mysterious, veiled men would arrive. These were the Bedouins who guarded the caravan route. They provided information about bandits and rebellious tribes. They were known to arrive and leave in silence, wrapped in their cloaks and head coverings, revealing only their eyes. During one of those nightly gatherings, the camel driver joined the young man and the Englishman around a small fire and said, "Camel driver, there are rumors of a war breaking out among the tribes." The three men fell silent, and the Spanish youth noticed a sense of fear, though no one spoke a word. After a moment, the Englishman asked if there was any danger. The driver replied, "Whoever dares to enter the desert cannot turn back. Since retreat is impossible, we must focus only on the best way to move forward. The rest is in God's hands, including the danger." He ended his words with that magical phrase, "Maktub." After the driver left, the young man said to the Englishman, "You should pay more attention to the caravan. It strays far from its path, but it always heads toward the same point." The Englishman replied, "And you should read more books about the world. Books are just like caravans." From that point on, the long caravan of men and animals began to move faster. Silence no longer dominated only the day, but spread to the night as well, the time when the men used to gather and chat around the fire. Gradually, the silence took over. One day, the caravan leader decided not to light a fire at night anymore, so as not to attract attention. After that, the travelers limited themselves to sleeping within a circle formed by the animals, trying to seek warmth from the cold of the night. The caravan leader also stationed a few armed guards around the camp. One night, the Englishman couldn't sleep, so he went looking for the Spanish youth, and they walked together near the nearby dunes. It was a night when the moon was full, and the young man told his whole story to the Englishman. The Englishman showed particular interest in the time the boy had spent working in the shop, which had grown more prosperous every day during his employment. He said to him, "That's the principle that governs everything, and which alchemy calls the soul of the world. When you truly want something with all your heart, you are close to the soul of the world. That is always a positive force." He then said that this was not a trait exclusive to humans, for everything in existence has a soul, whether a plant, an animal, a stone, or even a simple idea. He continued, "Everything beneath the earth or upon it never ceases to move, because the earth is a living being and it has a soul, and we rarely recognize that this soul is working in our favor. But you must know that the vases themselves in the crystal shop were working for your success." The young man watched the moon and the white sands in silence for a while, then finally said, "I've watched the caravan crossing the desert, and it speaks the same language as the desert, and that's why it allows it to pass. It never stops testing every step it takes to see whether those steps are in complete harmony with it or not. If that's truly the case, then the caravan will reach the oasis. But if one of us, despite all his courage, fails to understand this in language, he dies from the very first day." They continued to contemplate the moonlight together for a while. Then the young man continued, "That is the magic of signs. I've seen how our guides read the signs in the desert, and how the soul of the caravan converses with the soul of the desert." After a moment, it was the Englishman's turn to speak, and he finally said, "I really should be paying more attention to the caravan," the young man replied, "and I should read your books. They were indeed strange books, speaking of Mercury, salt, dragons and kings, but he didn't understand a thing. Yet there was one idea that kept recurring in all the books, the idea that everything is a manifestation of one thing." He discovered in one of the books that the most important text in alchemy was written on a simple emerald, and the Englishman, proud to teach his companion something, explained to him, "That is the emerald tablet. Then what's the point of all these books?" So that you can understand those few lines. The Englishman himself didn't seem convinced by that answer. The book that intrigued the young man the most was the one that told the stories of famous alchemists. They were men who spent their entire lives refining metals in their laboratories, believing that if a person continued melting a certain metal for years and years, that metal would eventually rid itself of all its known properties, leaving behind nothing but the soul of the world. This unique element would allow alchemists to understand everything that exists on the surface of the earth, because it is the language through which all things communicate. This discovery, which they called the masterwork, consisted of a liquid part and a solid part. The young man asked, "Isn't it enough to observe people and signs to reach this language?" The Englishman replied angrily, "You're obsessed with the desire to simplify. Alchemy is a serious discipline, and every stage of the process must be followed exactly as the masters instructed." The young man discovered that the liquid part of the masterwork is called the elixir of life, and that this elixir not only cures diseases, but also prevents aging for the alchemist. As for the solid part, it is called the philosopher's stone. This Englishman said to him, "It's not easy to discover the philosopher's stone. Alchemists have spent many years in their laboratories watching the fire that purifies metals, and as they stared at the fire, a detachment from the vanities of the world slowly crept into the depths of their hearts, until one day they realized that purifying the metal had, in fact, purified their own souls." At that moment, the young man remembered the crystal merchant who told him that cleaning the vases was a good thing, because it rid both of them of bad thoughts, and he became more convinced that it must be possible to learn alchemy through daily life. The Englishman continued, "In addition to that, the philosopher's stone has a completely unique property, as a single shard of it is enough to transform large quantities of base metal into gold." From that moment, the young man's interest in alchemy grew significantly, and he thought that with a little patience he could turn everything into gold. He read the biographies of various characters he came across: Helvetius, Elias, Fulcanelli, and Geber. They were amazing stories. Each of them lived their personal legend to the fullest. They traveled, met scholars, performed miracles before skeptics' eyes, and obtained the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But when the young man tried to find out for himself how to achieve the masterwork, he found himself at a dead end. There were only drawings, talismans, and obscure texts. One night he asked the Englishman, "Why do they use such an incomprehensible language?" He also noticed on that occasion that the Englishman was in a particularly bad mood, as if he missed those books, and the Englishman replied, "That's so only those who are truly responsible may understand." Imagine for a moment that everyone began turning lead into gold. Very soon, gold would be worth nothing. Only great minds and determined seekers can achieve the masterwork. That's why I'm here in this desert, because I want to meet a real alchemist who can help me decode the symbols. And when were these books written? Several centuries ago. At that time, the printing press had not yet been invented, and it was completely unlikely that everyone would gain knowledge of alchemy. So why then this strange language and all these numbers? Despite all this insistence, he did not answer the question. He said that he had been observing the caravan attentively for several days, and that he hadn't discovered anything new, except for one thing, the frequent mention of war. One day the young man returned the books to the Englishman, who asked him eagerly, "So, did you learn much?" This Englishman needed someone to talk to forget the fear of war. The young man said, "I've learned that the world has a soul, and that whoever can understand that soul can also understand the language of things. I've learned that many alchemists lived their personal legend, and that they ended up discovering the soul of the world, the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. But I learned especially that these things are so simple they could be engraved on the surface of an emerald." The Englishman was disappointed. The boy had not been affected by years of study, or by magical symbols, or by the complex words that needed to be understood, nor by laboratory equipment. He said to himself, he must be too dull to grasp such things. Then he took his books, placed them in a bag hanging on the camel's back, and said to him, "Go back to your caravan." It didn't teach me much either. The young man sat reflecting on the vast silence of the desert and the sand stirred up by the animals as they walked. He repeated to himself, "Each person has their own way of learning. His way isn't mine, but we are both in search of our personal legend, and for that I respect him." The caravan continued traveling day and night, and veiled messengers kept appearing more frequently. The camel driver, who had become a friend to the young man, explained that the tribal war had begun. If they managed to reach the oasis, they would be considered lucky. The animals were exhausted, and the men became increasingly silent. The silence grew more ominous at night, especially when a camel would groan. Something that once was just a camel's groan now spread fear among everyone. It might be a sign of an imminent attack. Even so, the camel driver didn't seem particularly alarmed by the looming threat of war. He said to the young man, while eating dates from his hand on a moonless night without campfires, "I live, and when I eat, I do nothing but eat. And when it's time to walk, I walk. That's all there is. If someday I must be killed, then any day is as good as another to die. I don't live in the past or the future. I only live in the present. And that's what matters. If you can always live in the present, you'll be a happy man. You'll understand that there is life in the desert, and in the water there are stars, and that warriors fight because it is a natural part of human life. And when you understand that life becomes a celebration and a grand festival, because it is precisely the moment we are living and nothing else." 2 nights later, as the young man was about to fall asleep, he looked at the star the caravan followed to guide their way, and it seemed to him that the horizon was sinking because the desert sky was scattered with hundreds of stars. The guide said to him, "That is the oasis. Then why don't we go there right away? Because we need sleep." The young man opened his eyes as the sun began to rise on the horizon, and in the place where the little stars had sparkled at night, there now stretched before his eyes an endless forest of palm trees, filling the entire horizon of the desert. The Englishman, who had just woken up as well, shouted, "Here we are! We've arrived!" Still, the boy remained silent. The desert had taught him silence, and he was content with observing the palm trees before him. He still had a long way to go to reach the pyramids, and this morning would, one day, be nothing more than a memory. For now, it was the present moment, the feast the camel driver had spoken of, and he tried to live that moment with the lessons of his past and the dreams of his future. Yes, the sight of those thousands of palm trees would one day be just a memory, but in that moment it meant shade, water, and shelter from the war. Just as a groaning camel can become a warning of danger, a forest of palm trees can represent a miracle. The boy thought, the world speaks in more than one language. The alchemist thought, when the rhythm of time accelerates, caravans hasten as well. At that moment, he was watching hundreds of people and animals arriving at the oasis. The residents rushed to greet the new arrivals with morning cheers, and a cloud of dust blocked the desert sun. The children jumped around excitedly at the sight of the strangers. The alchemist watched the caravan leaders gathering to welcome the head of the caravan, then holding a lengthy meeting together. None of this mattered to the alchemist, for he had already seen crowds of people coming and going, and the oasis and the desert remained unchanged. He had seen kings and beggars crossing those expanses of sand that shift shape with the wind, but remain, nevertheless, the same as he had known them in his childhood. Despite that, he could not suppress the joy in his heart, the kind that every traveller feels when, after yellow earth and azure skies, the greenery of a palm forest appears before his eyes. He said to himself, perhaps the desert was created so that man could appreciate the sight of palm groves. Then he decided to focus on practical matters, for he knew that the person who was supposed to teach him some of his secrets would arrive with this caravan. The signs had told him so, though he did not yet know this man. But his trained eyes would recognize him the moment he laid eyes on him. He hoped the man would have a talent like that of his former disciple. He thought, I don't know why these things always have to be passed from mouth to ear. It's not. That they're true secrets. God reveals secrets freely to all his creatures. And he found only one explanation, that these things must be transmitted this way because they are, without a doubt, among the pure truths of life, and that kind of life is difficult to embody in images, let alone in words, because people are fascinated by images and words. They end up forgetting the language of the world.